listening to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us today for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Ben Connable. Ben is the Executive Director of the nonprofit Battle Research Group and Adjunct Professor of Security Studies at Georgetown University. Ben is a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer and Middle East Foreign Area officer and a former senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Hannah.
So just to kick things off, can you tell us kind of where your story began?
Dropping out of college. So I was I had always wanted to be in the military, and I went to school when I was 18, kind of more because I felt that I had to than anything else. And I was aimless, didn't feel like I was getting to where I wanted to go. And I dropped out and I enlisted in the Marine Corps when I was 19. And then was enlisted and then became an officer after that. Started out as an infantry Marine, was at 8th and I in DC, which was a terrific first tour. It was during a pretty tense time in DC's history, right in the middle of the crack epidemic, down at 8th and I. And I was up at Camp David, and then I went out to 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines for the first Gulf War, 90, 91. And then I was a military police officer, then an intelligence officer, Middle East Foreign Area officer. And I got the opportunity to deploy all around the world. It was a really great career.
That's awesome. So was there anything that kind of sparked your interest in serving in the military, or is it just something you just always knew you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think it was something I always knew I wanted to do. I mean, I was one of those kids that really enjoyed reading military history and kind of immersed myself in it. I was fascinated by all the stories, and this is back when we still used libraries, and I would go into the library and just kind of get lost in the military history sections. And I always had a stack of books floating around, and I was I had a vivid imagination. So it kind of, that stuff takes hold. The more you immerse yourself in it, the more you kind of believe in the kind of moral, ethical challenge, but the more you're presented with the moral and ethical challenges in warfare, and the more that you see the value in making the right decision and seeing the examples of strong leadership, seeing how these things play out when good and bad decisions are made. It's compelling, and it gives you kind of a driving desire to kind of be part of it, to serve something greater than yourself, and to see how you'll do in those situations.
So was there an event or a person that served as, a catalyst in your military career?
Hey, that's a good question. There are so many. I mean, I think we're all inspired by each other just as much as we are by leaders. And I would actually say that my friends were more of an inspiration to me than anybody else, because you really get to know their strengths and weaknesses. And, look, I'm not the toughest, strongest guy by any stretch of the imagination. And so I was always amazed by the people around me, the toughness of individual Marines. Guys came from broken homes, guys that had, really no experience doing anything much in life. But when you put 100-pound pack on their back and told them to go, that nothing stopped them. And, the almost Olympic-like physical heroics of some of these guys always impressed me. And then the moral and ethical decision-making of my peers as well. Now, that's not to say I wasn't lucky enough to serve for some, under some amazing people. And I was very lucky during my 3 subsequent deployments to Iraq to work for General Mattis, who went on to become the Secretary of Defense, for General Kelly, who went on to become the White House Chief of Staff, for General Dunford, who was the Marine Corps Commandant and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Jocko Tulin, General Nicholson, all these amazing leaders. And I think anybody that's had a career in the military and was lucky enough to serve in a time when they're just this collection of amazing people. I think this happened during the Vietnam War, during the Korean War. These legendary folks, you're part of something special. And I think anybody that served during the time frame that I served has that feeling, right? When those are names that we revere, and I consider myself very lucky to have served with and under them.
So Ben, every journey, has its hurdles. Can you tell us kind of what some of the biggest obstacles were that you faced, whether it's in your military or post-military career, and kind of how you overcame them?
I think it's always yourself. I think it's something inside that you stumble over, that you struggle with, and that's true for me as it is for anybody. I think it would reveal a kind of lack of depth to point outwards when that question is asked, right? I mean, you'd really have to look at yourself. And so all of the weaknesses that I had amassed when I was a kid, I had to overcome them. And a lot of times I failed. A lot of times I was, I thought yelling was the right answer instead of talking. I thought that, telling people what to do instead of listening to them was the right approach. And it took me an unfortunately long period of time to really understand the relationship that I was supposed to have with Marines that worked for me in particular, and that it was supposed to be a supportive relationship. I mean, because I started out with the understanding that it was all kind of a brutal, ruthless, kind of like a drill instructor relationship, and it absolutely is not. You need to look out for people. And some people get that instinctively. Some of them come into the military knowing that just from their previous life experiences. I was not lucky enough to be one of those folks, so I made plenty of mistakes.
Oh, that's an insightful reminder. I think that can apply to everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
So after you retired from the Marine Corps, you transitioned into a couple different roles. Can you, tell us what kind of drew you to those, next chapters, and how your military experience influenced, the work you're doing today?
Yeah, and I've said this in other venues, and I think it's really kind of important to keep repeating because, particularly today, we're all dragged into the next thing. We're all kind of fixated on something either right in front of us, tantalizingly 10 feet ahead, or we're planning our lives out like like a military operation going all the way to death. And I am not ashamed to admit that I have ADHD. And, there are some of us who are able to take that shortcoming and weaponize it. And the way I've weaponized it is a lot. I've channeled it into the thing that's right in front of me. And my success, for the limited success that I've had in life compared to others, right? I mean, like whatever success I've had, I owe both to the people that supported me, but also to my fixation on the thing right in front of me. And no matter what it was, no matter how mundane it was, no matter how seemingly pointless it was, I just sank myself into it. And that paid dividends every step of the way because it meant that I took everything seriously. It meant that I tried to excel, even if I failed. I tried to excel at whatever I was doing, and people pay attention to that. And so it's a little bit counterintuitive. I wasn't trying to impress anybody. And I wasn't trying to move ahead that way, but just by doing that, it naturally occurs. So when I left the Marine Corps, when I retired in 2009, I was given a talk. It didn't occur to me what my next steps were going to be. I never planned really my next step. I never planned my next duty station. They all just kind of emerged. And then this guy from RAND, the RAND Corporation, think tank, effectively, or research center, saw me speak. I knew what I was talking about, and he hired me. And I think it was 2 days from initial meeting to job opportunity.
Wow.
So ran for 13 years, yeah, and before I went off on my own.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting to kind of hear how that progressed. I think, being open to opportunities versus figuring or assuming you have to have it all figured out, from birth to death, all the plots.
Yeah, yeah, and I see that, it's an unfortunate, there's something of a generational change with that too. And I
Yeah.
see that in some of the younger people that I've worked with over particularly in the last 15 years, this kind of desire to always, kind of shape your life in the present so it supports your next activity.
Yeah.
And I see too many people just, letting life pass them by. They're never fully immersed in the thing right in front of them. I've had students at Georgetown that I've spoken with about that challenge, where
Mhm.
they're so worried about their grade and the next thing that's happening that they're not enjoying this wonderful opportunity to read these books that they're never going to pick up again, to write a paper that nobody's ever going to ask them to write again,
Yeah.
and to develop their critical thinking skills. And they're just, some of them are just so fixated on shaping that they miss it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's sound advice for everyone.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think.
they miss the potential adventure. So
Yeah. What's
yeah.
the point of it all if you just get to the end and you're still focused on the next thing and it's not coming?
That's true. Your obit is your resume.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your book, Ground Combat: Puncturing the Myths of Modern War?
Yeah, I wrote that over the last couple of years, last few years now. It was something that I had kind of envisioned when I was at the Rand Corporation. Rand is a very tightly controlled institution for a lot of good and sometimes not so great reasons. And one of the things I was frustrated with was the kind of lack of not comprehensive, but at least holistic understanding of warfare as it's practiced around the world on a routine basis. And so I just wrote a proposal after I left Rand and was doing other things, had some time to do it. I got a grant from the Smith Richardson Foundation, and I went ahead and built a database of, it's really 592 or something battles total, but 423 battles that occurred around the world, Sri Lanka, Iraq, Philippines, wherever, from 2000, the beginning of 2003 to the end of 2022. So it includes the first phase of the Ukraine invasion.
Mhm.
Um, and then I wrote a book based on that. And then along with the database and the findings from the database, I also built a kind of linear understanding of the progression of technology over time. Because one of the things I wanted to really query was the idea of the revolution of military affairs and the idea that we're in this moment now, in a period of time in which as is commonly stated by senior military and political leaders, war is changing at such a rapid rate that if we don't jump ahead, we're going to get destroyed. The character of war is changing at a rate never before seen, so on and so forth. And that lack of historical context, the hyperbole that exists in that lack of historical context, I found somewhat alarming. And so I try to address that as well.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating kind of questions to approach this topic with. As you were talking, I was just kind of thinking about in industry, kind of in the defense industry, the push is just constantly, the next big thing, more tech, weaponizing more technology, just and I last year I worked on this transcribing this handwritten journal from a family member that was World War One in the trenches. And so he had completely documented, breaking through the Hindenburg Line and the events leading up to it. And one thing that shocked me about that, Ben, was as I was going through this, so this was a little over 100 years, roughly 100 years from this ancestor's time in the trenches, my spouse's time in Afghanistan. And as I was like digitally transcribing this journal, there was a lot of similarities from kind of what, the World War One ancestor was experiencing and my spouse and his experiences. And for me, that was so like contrary to what I was hearing in industry, because they're like, war has rapidly changed. We're shifting gears. And it was kind of a surreal moment, because it was like, but how are we still encountering the same things and a lot of the same tactics are working? And like, I guess I just wondered, that's kind of anecdotal, but if you, could expound on any thoughts about kind of the concept of modern warfare being revolutionarily different, or what are we seeing that's similar?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you did that without using AI. Right. And what a wonderful experience to do it by hand, because you become intimately familiar with the material.
Yeah.
And there's a value to that that's probably being lost globally at the moment. But that's great, and I hope you publish something from that. But I look, I mean that you always have to go into a study understanding your own biases. I went in skeptical of the Revolutionary Military Affairs, so
Yeah.
the fact that I found it not to be a genuine phenomenon, you can certainly look at my results with some skepticism. However, I was able to trace a fairly gentle evolutionary progression, jagged, right? But if you
Yeah.
smooth the line out over time, I mean, there is an evolutionary change in warfare. But even while the forms, I'm sorry, of war have changed. So the rifle that was used in World War I has evolved to something that looks far more space warfare like now, like the M7 rifle being used by the U.S. Army. In fact, the functions of those two weapons are identical. You're putting a weapon up to your shoulder, squeezing a trigger, and a round comes out of a rifle barrel, goes over, goes through the air, and ideally, if you're good at it, strikes somebody. We've added scopes, we've added the precision of the munitions, so on and so forth, but ultimately the function is identical. And so the technical functions of the components of warfare are effectively unchanged. We've had aerial observation since at least the Battle of Fleury. I'm trying to remember the time frame there, 1700s, when balloons were used for observation. So the drone is an evolution of that as well. And we can come back to drones if you like. But I mean, all of these things to some extent are evolutionary. Again, the forms change, but the functions remain relatively consistent. And if that's true, and if we also believe that war is a fundamentally human endeavor, which is, by the way, right at the front of all of our military doctrine, all our doctrine is still in effect today. We state that up front. War is a human endeavor. Then why are we becoming so enamored with technology? And that's cyclical, by the way, right? I show in my book how this happens periodically. There are periods of time when we become more enamored with technology. But the practical realities of what you described, this consistency, is always there, even as the fascination with tech and the fear of technology rises and falls.
That's really interesting, Ben. That's a great description. Good insight.
So, I mean, it's not an easy concept for people to absorb, because we're inundated on a daily basis with messaging from industry, from political and military leaders telling us that everything is changing dramatically. And we have folks like Palmer Luckey, the head of Anduril, 32-year-old guy. I praise him for his energy and innovative prowess, but he has no experience with military history, with military technology. He is as an individual incapable of putting any of the things that he's developing or proposing in historical context. Therefore, when he says or tells people that this is game changing and this is insane, or whatever the terminology is, that warfare is going to change completely and everything will become autonomous just over this near horizon, that's ahistorical. I mean, he's not aware of all of the previous people that have made that claim, going back to Giulio Douhet in right after World War I. I mean, 1899, I.S. Bloch, who was a Polish econometrics guy, that expert, said, he wrote a book. Then he said, human warfare is no longer possible. It's because of the rifle. That we're never going to see people fighting again. It's right before World War I, so not terribly prescient. But we're in this weird moment in time where we seem to be particularly vulnerable to that sales pitch. And all of us, maybe it's because of social media, maybe it's because of our shorter attention spans. We're not reading really anything of substance anymore. We're all increasingly vulnerable to that sales pitch. And only historical analysis and understanding allows you to put things into meaningful context.
Yeah, that's provides some grounding, I think, for questions that people are asking. I know for myself, I got interested in cyber warfare from kind of a very personal experience. I lost loved ones in GWAT, and I thought, 20 something years old, Ben, I thought, well, if we could get the way we fight wars so technologically advanced, it won't be IEDs blowing up people we love, which is, that's just is very basic. And I know that's very naive, but it prompted kind of the interest in cyber warfare for myself. And the more I studied it, though, the more I kept coming back to kind of what you're talking about as war as kind of a fundamental element of human existence. And it really doesn't matter how technologically, we're not going to like code beyond, the act of war. We're not going, that has never been done before in human history.
Right. And of course, in the American milieu, if you say, well, it's never been done before, somebody's going to tell you, well, that doesn't mean it can't happen.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that innovative spirit is essential to our collective national success. There is a great value in having people like Palmer Luckey out there trying to, rip away the bleeding edge of problems and say, no, we can cross this, we can achieve this, we can build this. But unfortunately, we get dragged into this world in which innovation is believed to be collectively, culturally, as an unalloyed good. That if you're innovating, you're inherently doing something good. Therefore, any criticism of innovation is naysaying or and actually negative. Instead of being what it could be, and sometimes it is, right? I mean, sometimes, like that guy's he's only 32 years old and he's wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Why should I listen to him? That's ignorant as well. But hey, this guy doesn't really have the background and experience to be telling us these things. And this guy also is making money off of the outcome. Maybe we should be a little more skeptical about where this is taking us. That is a healthier mindset. And so there is a middle ground here that is often not reached in our essentialist times, right? Everything's, you love it, you hate it. I agree with you, I hate you. In reality, life tends to exist somewhere in the middle. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with your instinct there. I mean, that is a very normal reaction, certainly to a trauma. Like we want to protect people. Over time, though, in the American military in particular, as we have become less accepting of our own government's explanations for war purpose, Vietnam, Somalia, Lebanon, Iraq, Afghanistan. Why are we fighting these wars? Why are we losing people? You can see the decline in acceptance of risk and the decline in acceptance of casualties over time. There's a great piece. His name is escaping me. I can give you a link to post underneath the podcast later. But there's a guy that I cite in my book. He wrote a really interesting article that the American officer corps is actually more risk averse in general than the American population, because we have that collectively. We have that feeling like we have to protect everybody. We don't want to risk anybody. We don't want to lose soldiers. And over time, what that's led to is an actually very unhealthy shift in the way that we think about not just war fighting, but technical development as well. And so all of our military designs are extraordinarily risk averse. If we build tanks, these enormous behemoth tanks that are designed to resist every single enemy weapon, but in reality, there's no way to build something that is impervious to attack. Right. But now they cost 10 times what the previous model cost, and we can buy fewer of them. And now we have less capability, and we're actually weakening ourselves because of that kind of compounding cultural fear that we have kind of deeply inculcated at this point.
Now that's fascinating, kind of the relationship between our approach to innovation and then risk aversion. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and that's a tough conversation to have, right? I mean, you have to tell people that we're being too risk averse, and you need to actually buy things that are going to get blown up more easily. Yeah, because that makes a lot more sense from a military if you're from a warfighting perspective,
Yeah.
and also to say, hey, that innovation that you're doing is actually not all that brilliant, uh,
Yeah.
and that you can actually innovate negatively. And the
Yeah.
example that I like using is the M16 rifle, the first introduction from the AR-15 into the M16, which was kind of thrown out into the battlefield in Vietnam. Interestingly enough, almost in the same way that we're talking about throwing commercial off-the-shelf capabilities into the battlefield now, which is, hey, we got to overcome this bureaucracy. Let's get something out there. We got to move faster. And like the tech industry tends to do, the concept is, well, we'll just throw it out into the field and see if it works, and we'll fix it later. The problem with that is that the guys that pay for that are the soldiers on the ground. And in Vietnam, the M16 was put into the hands of a lot of soldiers very rapidly with inadequate testing, and it was poorly designed, and it would jam and misfire, and it had all sorts of flaws. And soldiers and Marines were found dead with their weapons broken open and cleaning rods inserted in them because the weapon was failing, and they had nothing to fight back with. So there's a case. That's just one case of innovation gone wrong.
Yeah, that's a great example. I appreciate your kind of emphasis on, innovation isn't just inherently good, right? There needs part of that innovation cycle is the skepticism, is the criticism, is that, you see the errors, we update, not just throw it right into the battlefield. And I think that's something that, especially with the conversation regarding AI, people are either like, oh, they're all for it, or, they're, like you said, all in or all not. And reality of responsible, ethical AI applications that will be effective on the battlefield is somewhere very much in the middle of that.
Yeah, I agree. And that's true of, I think, generally of life as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there very clearly are useful AI applications for coding, for
Yeah.
solving mathematical problems, for gene splicing, or all the scientific applications. But when we talk about large language model, broad acceptance of large language model, I mean, we're already seeing very serious negative implications of that. People being, effectively guided towards suicide by large language models, being driven insane by it. But more worrisome is, effectively getting rid of critical thinking in schools, and all sorts of other, kind of downsides. And if you are even mildly critical of large language models, then you are an anti-AI antagonist. Somebody posted on LinkedIn at one point, if you don't want your students to use AI in school, get over yourself. And which is a really interesting perspective, right? I mean, basically you're shutting me down. You're saying that I can't raise any concerns about perspective illiteracy. And that's not I mean, that's not alarmist. I mean, there are schools that are reducing the reading assignments because they know that the students won't read anything and they won't write their own papers. I spoke with a teacher whose school shut down their library entirely because books aren't being read anymore. Not entirely AI's fault. But also they just kind of stopped assigning readings and writing written assignments because the students will just use AI for them. So again, I agree with you. There's a middle ground there. Finding a way to get there is really important, and finding a way to recognize, and this is both in a military and non-military context, that it is not necessarily healthy for us to accept at face value messaging from people that are making money from these proposed solutions to problems I'm not even sure exist in many cases. Interesting. Today, Eric Schmidt published something in the New York Times saying, hey, we need to slow down on the race towards artificial general intelligence and superintelligence. We're missing out on the routine day-to-day applications. So when Eric Schmidt's giving you a warning that we're going too fast, maybe he's a more useful voice. To listen.
That's true. Big red flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ben, today, I know you have many roles, but one of your roles is the executive director of the nonprofit Battle Research Group. Can you tell us about, y'all's mission and work?
Yeah, this was another thing that we conceived of when I was at Rand with my colleague James Sladden. James is a former Royal Marine. He was at Rand Europe, I was at Rand U.S., and we were both frustrated by the kind of lack of focus and emphasis on field research in particular. And so historically, if you go back and look at World War II, the Korean War, to some extent the Vietnam War, the U.S. military had a large number of historians and also people that were solely responsible for developing the kind of narrative, the battle narrative, what had happened, the unit narratives, battle narratives. There were human beings that had that role, and they would go out into the field. They would be there during the battle in many cases. They would interview people right after the battle. They would draw sketches and maps. They would collect physical evidence from the battlefield, including paperwork, and then send all those things back so they could be carefully archived and analyzed. Over time, especially as electronic data became more prevalent, those jobs went away. And so the people whose sole responsibility it was to track what a unit was doing, their jobs went away. The people whose sole responsibility it was to go out and be historians in the field, the number of those jobs shrank considerably. And because there was this general perspective that just because the electrons exist, therefore we have this latent and enduring knowledge.
Mhm.
But over time, if you actually look at our understanding of what happens on a battlefield, it has gotten worse and worse and worse. And so I can tell you from World War II, I can pick a specific battle and we can probably tell you every single soldier that fought and where they were in a specific point in the battle. There might be 25 or even 50 books written about even one of the smaller battles. There are interviews, everything. There's an entire written record, and there might be, thousands of cubic feet of archive material somewhere. Now let's look at just even some of the battles that we fought in the 21st century, including Fallujah, Ramadi, Sangin, Kabul, Baghdad, whatever battle you want to pick. There's almost nothing. There are books, but if you actually read them, the citation is not terrific, right? The material that we would have relied upon to do that kind of analytic work, the primary source material, is absent. So one of the main reasons we created the Battle Research Group is to go back out there and get people into the field to do that research and to help us understand modern warfare in great detail from the field. What is actually happening? What actually just happened? Obviously, this goes hand in glove with my book and the database that we created. And so what we do is we send people out into battlefield areas and we send them back over and over again. They walk the terrain. They interview people. As they interview people, we use what's called the snowball effect to get more and more interviews. You build relationships and trust with people on the ground, and then you get better and better access. And you make people more and more comfortable with what you're doing, so they'll talk to you and tell you what happened. And it's fascinating to watch the story evolve over time. And what you think happened at the beginning of your research changes. And you realize, well, no, that they weren't actually over here. No, that person didn't actually make that decision. It was actually this person. And your understanding evolves. The history lives as you build the narrative out and as you collect more and more primary sources. That is the kind of understanding we really need to keep us from falling prey to these kind of hyperbolic explanations of warfare. So we've got our first piece out, the Battle of Irpin River. It's publicly available, free PDF. Narrative, timeline, order of battle, geometry of forces on the battlefield, telling the story with maps, with narrative, with human perspective. And we've got grants in the works to go out and do this in Syria, Iraq, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and other places. And of course, our work in Ukraine is ongoing. It's tough. It's not easy. We put people in harm's way. We have very strict protocols for how we do that. It requires people that are willing to stick their necks out. And James does most of our field work at the moment, but we're building a team as we speak.
That's fascinating. I was not aware of kind of the lack of field research, and I guess honestly, just as you were talking about, I was thinking, I was like, oh, I just, assumed there would be more field research with technology, like our information age. How do we have a lack of it now? So your explanation of that was very enlightening.
Our understanding of even where our own military forces are on the ground in combat zones has gotten worse,
Oh,
demonstrably worse over time. I was fascinating. I did a study when I was at Rand to try to ascertain where U.S. Army forces had been in the Middle East in the 21st century. And I went to the unit historians at this U.S. Central Command, at the Army Component Command, at the Army Center of Military History. And I was told, I won't say who told me this, but I was told bluntly by one of these experts, I have no clue.
wow.
Because what I just explained, the people that were tasked with recording these things they effectively don't exist anymore because this has all been relegated to digital documentation.
Yeah,
But that the people that would do the digital documentation don't exist because that would have been the same person, the same clerk that was
yeah.
right-sized down. And so nobody's doing it. And there's all this flood of digits coming in,
Mhm,
but a lot of them disappear.
mhm.
If you talk to any Marine or soldier who was in Iraq or Afghanistan, they'll tell you about the number of hard drives they wiped clean at the end of their deployment. Effectively erasing every single thing that unit did.
Wow.
That happened over and over again. So a lot of this is just lost to history.
Yeah. No, that's well fascinating, and also so glad y'all are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and it needs to be done at a bigger scale. I hope
Yeah.
we're hoping for competition, frankly. I mean, we're hoping more
Yeah,
people. Yeah.
that's awesome. So what new developments around defense are you most excited about? I know there's lots of new things in the sector of defense, but what are you tracking on? What is your, kind of focus in that area?
You mean technology wise?
Sure, yeah, technology or approach, anything that's kind of got your attention.
Sure. It'd be counter unmanned aerial system technology, so CUAS.
Mhm.
And the reason I am focused on that at the moment is that it's our part of our big misunderstanding with advanced technology and the supposed rapid changes in modern warfare centers on the use of drones, and particularly in
Mhm.
Ukraine. There are
Mhm.
a lot of reasons drones are so widely used in parts of the Ukrainian battlefield right now. They're idiosyncratic to a great extent, but we're extrapolating to say, well, we need more drones. We need them now. We need to have a drone in every rifle squad. We need to have drones everywhere. We're falling behind. We're going to die. So the typical technophilia, technophobia, risk aversion, fear, let's invest more, investment is good. In reality, though, this is debatable, but I think there's a growing consensus that we're in a period of misalignment. And this happens with any technology over time. And that there will be a technological advance, and that advance will give temporary advantage to the people that are able to use it.
Mhm.
Not always the organization or country that develops it. It's the one that takes best advantage of it.
Mhm.
Um, and that lasts for a period of time. And then everybody that is suffering from that disadvantage tries to make up for it because this is a life and death situation. This is an
Mhm.
existential challenge. And so they put extraordinary effort into counter design. And so in this case, counter UAS was lagging and is now catching up with UAS. And so now we have everything from drone killing drones, firing shotguns and
Mhm.
nets and ramming. We have electronic warfare, we have lasers, microwaves, even just basic shotguns. But this entire kind of layered network of counter UAS systems is catching up with UAS. And so we're going to see a rebalancing. And I think
Mhm.
that the important thing to track there is, well, if there's going to be rebalancing, are the investments that we're making really worthwhile? And is the warfighting concept behind those investments sound? And I'm one of the people that argues no, that it is not sound, and that we need to slow down and think this through. That unfortunately again puts me in the position of being a naysayer, right?
Yeah.
And that always makes me the least popular person in the room. But when we're surrounded by this much hyperbole, I feel like that's an important role to play. So I'll take that hit. And it balances again. Now let's step back and think about war in historical perspective again.
Mhm.
I have a quiz online on groundcombat.org. Anybody can take it. I'm giving away some of the answers here, but I ask, when was the first suicide drone built and tested and ready? And when was the first suicide drone used in warfare? First suicide drone was built and ready for combat, even though imperfect, in 1918. The Kettering bug and the Krakatoa bomb, two different drones. 1918. So radio guided, basically flying bomb. First used in combat in World War II by the Italians against British shipping, but then the U.S. Navy had drones they were flying and actually successfully used to destroy some Japanese ships near Bougainville, used consistently in the Iran-Iraq War, in Vietnam, by the Israelis, by the South Africans. So, the first quadcopter drone was built in, I think, the 1980s. Quadcopters with cameras. I mean, I was flying a quadcopter drone around my house with my kids, 20 years ago, I think, something like that. So, no, they're not that old. 15 years ago, for sure. So this is not new technology. And so we all need to take kind of a breath and step back, put everything in perspective.
So what are your top concerns, about national security in 2025? What keeps you up at night related to national security?
Our fixation on the China threat, China as the pacing threat, is grounded in many ways and justifiable in many ways. China does represent a legitimate threat to our national security in both military and non-military theaters. Drugs, cyber, competitive economic influence, so on and so forth, but also particularly as we think about the invasion of Taiwan and the potential Chinese takeover of the Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing operation, right? But what that has led to is a myopia, that a fixation on the Chinese threat within what the Chinese call the 9-dash line, which is their ostensible area of control in the South China Sea and all the way up to the eastern Chinese coast. So we're absolutely fixated on countering the Chinese in that specific geographic area at the expense of everything else globally. And I think that's a worrisome trend. And we're ignoring the threats in the Middle East that are still present and that still have direct impact on our economy and on our national security. We're ignoring, to some extent, or trying to obviate the threat in Europe or pretend it doesn't exist. And there are ways to balance these things out. There are ways to deal with the China threat to still keep China as a pacing threat outside of the 9-dash line. There are ways to counter China in competition and potentially in war around the world because they've exposed themselves through their Belt and Road program and are not a global military power in the same way that the United States is. So we're effectively trying to counter them where they have the greatest advantage and failing to try to address the China's threats in places where we have distinct advantage. And I think we can do a better job there. And then I'm concerned about the potential for tripping into Mexico. And I think that there's a significant potential there for unintentional escalation as we try to take on the cartels. Like the Chinese, the cartels represent a very real and serious threat to the country. And they do probably need to be dealt with. I would prefer that happen in a thoughtful, logical, and strategically oriented way rather than kind of a stumbling drone strike plan, which is, I think, where we're headed.
So Ben, what career advice do you have for kind of the next generation of folks interested in, military and national security careers?
If you're going to do this, if you're going to be a military person, you need to be physically fit, obviously. But you also need to be able to write and you need to be able to read. whether you're in the military or you approach this as a civilian, reading and writing are fundamental capabilities. And so don't use AI ever. And I mean ever. And if you can stick to that discipline, you're going to develop the critical thinking skills that you need in order to read and write, and you're going to surpass your peers that do succumb to the kind of siren song of AI. And there are a lot of great rationales for using AI for reading and writing. I don't have time. This quickly summarizes something for me. I don't have time it builds all my footnotes for me. It builds my bibliography for me. And that's just a waste of time. But any serious writer will tell you that no, the building of the bibliography and the footnotes is not a waste of time. And that is essential to understanding the complexity and depth of the problem. And if you're not reading the things that you're citing, the thing that you're writing has no value. And you're not really sure of the things that you're saying if you don't read the source material. And you're missing a tremendous opportunity to develop the skills, the critical thinking skills you would need as a national security professional, if you're missing out on that kind of exploration that occurs when you are building your own material, and failing. Reading and writing are both unnatural and difficult skills. Right? I mean, these are not things that we're drawn to naturally. You're almost fighting your own nature to do it every single time. So it's understandable that people would want to avoid it, but that's my top advice. Don't use AI.
I like that. I like it. I like the description of it being an exploration. I feel like people, kind of not going through that, avoiding kind of the cognitive pain that comes from rethinking about what you thought about or read about or came up with over and over and over. It is just kind of like a muscle that is just going to atrophy if they're opting for alternatives.
Yeah, and you're not generating anything of value.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that work, and you become increasingly vulnerable as, let's say, you're going to go and be a military leader and you're going to be making very serious decisions. How do you know where to look and how to judge, critically judge information being, let's say, intelligence information being given to you? I'll give you an example. I'm writing a piece right now on the idea that drones are causing 70% of all casualties in Ukraine, which is now just accepted at face value as fact. But if you actually pull the thread and look at all and follow all the citations and look at all the footnotes and see where it came from, it falls apart. And I've gone back and looked at the historical assessments of casualty causing agents from the Civil War all the way forward, and the data are awful. And so if the citations are there and you know how to read them and you understand all this, you now have an essential piece of information that's being presented to you. It's a decision driving piece of information. 70% of all casualties caused by drones. Well, that could very easily lead you then to the conclusion that drones are reshaping warfare. Therefore, we must buy more drones. You could redesign your entire military force around this one statistic if you don't realize that the statistic is actually unsupportable. And so that's the kind of critical thinking that we're talking about, and it's very practical, and it is potentially, in the most extreme cases, existential.
So looking forward, what developments are you most hopeful about in terms of kind of the future of defense?
Oh. What am I most hopeful about? I'm not. I'm not morose about anything either. We go through cycles, and right now we've been in a long dip. I think we have some cultural challenges that we're going to have to overcome. And so actually all of my concerns about our national security future are internal, in terms of civil military relations, in terms of critical thinking, in terms of the national will to fight and our belief in American causes. So, but that doesn't mean that we're inherently, that we're heading towards disaster. It means that we have a lot of work to do. and that people that care about their jobs need to stick with them, even if the environment for sticking with it is not ideal at the moment.
That's a great reminder. So Ben, any final words of advice or encouragement, I guess, for the audience?
Yeah, I will say there's a lot to be optimistic for, even in, and I'll go back to the AI and the critical thinking skills piece because it's applicable to everybody. If you can apply the discipline that I just described, you're going to be almost superhuman 10 years from now. And so the pathway is clear right in front of you. Keep applying the discipline, keep doing the same things you were doing before. There's no evidence that humanity was bereft of advancement in the age just prior to ChatGPT 4 emerging, right? I mean, it's not like AI is solving problems right now that have existed throughout humanity's, throughout the span of humanity. I mean, we're doing okay. The skills that got us this far have helped us progress significantly. So all indications are there that if you keep developing those same skills, you're going to be valued going forward. Don't lose hope in the idea that critical thinking, writing, reading, the basic skills that made us experts 5 years ago are going to go away. Don't lose hope.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, for coming on the show, sharing your insights, your experiences. I love chatting with you and know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many.
Well, thank you, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spheres. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.